Check, check. Partnership Director of the Climate Group. Okay.
Yeah, and all of the mic isn't coming up between the Petra pictures, so they'll be announcing the speaker names.
So I need to do a VOG for those?
Yeah, let me just confirm the mic is not going up. Mike, you're not going up to introduce each speaker, are you?
No. I'm not going to say any of the names of the 7 Petra people.
Yeah.
The only person I'm going to introduce is the first, is the moderator of the panel after the Petra
Yeah.
pictures.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'll finish my bit and sort of hand over to them.
Yeah.
So you'll see the names on the screens.
Okay.
So you can see who they are.
So we won't be doing
Yeah, we won't need to do that. So it's just Mike that you need to introduce. You ready to go, or you want to wait? Yeah? Yeah. And when Bryony arrives, if you could bring her to me so I can explain. Yeah? Yeah. Yeah.
And all the
Okay, so
panelists
they're
are
gonna
here.
go.
So Daniel's here, Dany's here.
So I'd like to extend a really warm welcome to this event on building futures at the Hub. My name is Mike Pearce. I'm the Corporate Partnership Director at the Climate Group, which means I have the great privilege on working on a range of issues, including our work on renewable electricity, energy productivity, electric vehicles, and LED lighting. And what's fantastic about this event is it encompasses all of those 4 areas in such a significant way. Buildings are such a critical part of that. So I'm really looking forward to this discussion. This is, in fact, the 4th year in a row we've had a building-themed event here at Climate Week. And in some ways, it's obvious why. Buildings represent 40% of global CO2 emissions, and here in New York, in the city, it's approximately 70%. This is a vital issue for us to be tackling. Today, we're going to be exploring the leading-edge smart tech that's disrupting the market, whether this is smart heating, Internet of Things, connected LED lighting, and, as you will hear, much, much more. We'll be looking at how those disruptions can be used to improve the energy productivity of buildings. So, what's the flow of the morning? It's very straightforward. First of all, we're going to be having a series of 7 fast-paced Petra presentations that are going to cover a range of disciplines and a range of parts of the world. We then have another international panel with representatives from business and government, and they're going to be looking at the challenges faced by landlords and tenants. And particularly within that, what are some of the collaborative approaches that can be taken to enable the transition within the buildings? We'll then close with a speech from Exelon Utilities, which will look at the future of the electric utility and the role particularly for that sort of organisation in supporting building efficiency and decarbonisation. I really look forward to that one, but for now, we're ready to kick off. We've got our Smart Tech presentations. I'm not going to introduce the speakers. You will see their names on the screen and they will come up and do their piece, and the next one will follow. Really looking forward to this. I hope you enjoy it too, and speak to you later on in the morning.
All right, fast pace. We're going to do this. Let's do this. I'm waiting for that clock to start. All right. I don't need to tell any of you that the climate crisis is scary. As my nephew would say, it's scary AF. It is clear that if we talk to anyone here or anyone out there, I mean, in fact, Yale and George Mason University said 7 out of 10 Americans are consistently worried about it. This is Houston, where they look out their windows and have fair reason to be concerned and worried about the climate crisis. But what are we going to do? And how come we don't do anything about it? It's probably the same reason why I don't clean these dishes at my house every morning. And the reality is that we think that there is time, and we think there's always the ability for us to put it off. And maybe some magnanimous partner or spouse will take up the help to make that happen. And to be honest, what makes it much, much worse in this scenario is that the fossil fuel industry knows this, and that they take advantage of that, and they help us by telling us, it's too big to fix. This is too big a deal. We can't do this now. And they spin that story and say that it's something that we can actually act on, and that they make it much, much worse with politicians that are in their pockets. That's where policy comes in. Policy, in terms of governance, the promise of government by the people is that it can also be government for the best in people. It lets us say that we know money and wealth and power can drive us in this direction, but we're going to bend the arc of history towards another direction. And in an ideal scenario, federal governments would be leading the charge on this, and they would be passing sweeping legislation that cities would then take upon themselves to push even further. There's no real replacement for aggressive federal action. However, that's not where we are. So what do we do here in New York City, and how do we think about tackling our challenge here? In New York City, one of the biggest challenges in our climate crisis is to match the ambition that built this skyline with the reality of the emissions that it represents. There are over 1 million buildings in New York City, literally over 1 million buildings. And as was said before, those buildings represent 68% of our greenhouse gas emissions. Cooling to keep them cool in the summer, heat to keep them warm in the winter. And most of those buildings will be here 50 years from now, over 90%. But when we think about this, we also have to keep in mind it's not just about buildings. It's the interconnectedness of everything. It's the fact that we have to look at cleaning our energy supply to be able to bring that energy to those buildings. It's about looking at battery storage and how we can use power when we want it. It's how we exchange electrons between those buildings and with electric vehicle infrastructure and with electric bike infrastructure. It's about building an economy around this data. And that's where I come in. I am the director of sustainability, and our job here in New York City is to paint a clear path with policies and programs from where we are right now to where we need to be, in terms of our relationship to our home planet. And as I said before, creating a data ecosystem is incredibly important around that. Data matters. Good data, better than bad data, but data matters. And what we've done is establish several laws and legislations like benchmarking to make sure we are creating the inflows of that data that lets us build on to make aggressive policies that can allow us to take advantage of predictive analytics and advantage of new processes. But people don't always believe us because, we're the government and sometimes people don't believe us. So we let people speak for themselves. And one of the ways we do that is that we initiate something called a carbon challenge. We have over 100 participants, hospitals, schools, real estate that take part in being able to showcase their portfolios and the advancements they're making. In addition to that, we launched the Retrofit Accelerator, which is a program that provides free data analytics, but also technical assistance for building owners that want to make retrofits and helps them to be able to aggressively move toward the 30% reduction. There's over 5,000 that we've helped so far. But bearing the lead on this, earlier this year, we passed the Climate Mobilization Acts in New York City, which included a building mandate, which will cap greenhouse gas emissions in existing large buildings. The first of its kind on the planet, and something that will revolutionize and change how we look at building in New York City and how we look at it beyond New York City. Now, those are a few things about buildings, but we got to keep in mind this is also bigger than buildings, right? This is a lot about how we acknowledge we're at a critical moment in the story arc of our species. And no matter who you are, what your skill set is, where you come from, you have a role to play in this fight, and we need you to be a part of this. Ultimately, there are things we must do. We must start now. There is no time. You saw the picture of Houston. You see these things all around the world. There is no time, and if we don't act aggressively, we do so at our own peril. We must absolutely begin to think about how we trust science. We can no longer let that be a question. The fact of the matter is that we have to acknowledge that the IPCC report gave us clear indication about a 10-year timeline to change things beyond which we cannot adapt to. The next thing we have to trust, or next thing we have to think about, is that we must consume less. And it's not just less electricity and less natural gas. It's, of course, those things. It's less big portions. It's less meat. It's less deliveries, less packaging, less disposables, less driving, less stuff that we absolutely do not need. And lastly, we must show up. We have to take some key from the 4 million young people that gathered around the globe last week on Friday and put their physical selves in line with their own values to make sure that their voice was heard. And we cannot ignore that. So no matter who you are, whether it's your boss, whether it's your politicians, whether it is your president, if they are willing to put the fossil fuel interests in front of us pushing off the potential of a sixth mass extinction, then we must vote them out, period. Thanks.
So that was Grace, and now you're going to see someone who's not an auctioneer trying to speak as quickly as an auctioneer. Yeah. Oh, I'm so sorry.
Well, you can.
That's the lack of grace right there.
Well, if your slides had been there, then I would have granted you the privilege. But yeah, okay. So then, yeah, on lighting. So actually, a few links also with what Mark mentioned. Sometimes we take light for granted, but then also, yeah, just realize if the lights are out, lots of things we cannot do. But then on the other hand, yeah, lighting is important in energy reduction, carbon savings, but also in smart buildings and in smart and ning buildings, as lighting, and I'll show you that, can also carry lots of data. So it was already mentioned, and I think mentioned many, many times, that buildings are responsible to close to 40% of global energy consumption and carbon emissions. But what is even more relevant is that about 2/3 of electricity is consumed by buildings, and about 85% of the electricity for lighting, the other 15 is outdoor. So we have an urgency to act on buildings. The good news there is if you add everything up, in all benefits, then building occupants and building owners, they can save up to $17 trillion a year. And only a fraction, maybe only 1%, that's a single-digit percentage, is in energy. The rest is in the efficiency that we use buildings and in people's well-being and benefits and productivity. So zooming in on offices, the largest segment in buildings, and also there you can add schools, which I often call little people offices. Then in the early 20th century, this is what offices looked like. They looked a little bit like factories, people then sitting in rows and then typing and producing what their job required. Only the conveyor belt was missing, you could say. In the 21st century, then offices have become a multidisciplinary place. So not only, let's say, the lots of different tasks that people perform, but also you yourself perform different tasks over the day, which can be brainstorming, meeting, focus moments. So that makes different requirements to a building. You also see there in global workplace trends. So we're moving to smart buildings, which is the whole session is all about, but also carbon neutral. Big data plays an important role also in the way we work and manage and interact. Already mentioned, workplace floor space utilization, and buildings become a marketing tool to attract talent and also to retain people. If you then look at some of those workplace trends in a bit more detail, then we're becoming increasingly conscious of the fact that let's say, buildings are attractive workplaces where people feel good, 48% greater chance that people retain instead of leaving. And well, the other time is flying by. But then also in terms of interactions and, let's say, connected devices, you see quickly in a few decades that we're moving in 2020 to 50 billion connected devices. Lighting alone, by the way, is the most granular appliance globally, so they're close to 30 billion light points, which is also why we made a commitment that as end of next year, all the LED lighting we put on the market is IoT connected or connectable. So huge background for the Internet of Things. Here you see a little bit background on the 17 trillion. So there's, like, you could say this is the 300 rule from JLL, and some others have looked into this. you can save 10 times on rent and floor space utilization, and you can even save like 100 times more on people productivity, calling in less sick. If you then look at how spaces are utilized in an office, apart from the fact that quite often we cannot find meeting spaces, then also we know that lots of times spaces are empty. You cannot find a workplace, so this leads to a lot of waste. So there's actually, if you add it up, something like, I think it's like $2,000 a year that is lost in productivity because of this. If you then look at comfort-related achievements with good lighting, lighting is not just white and on and off, you can achieve improvements of 25% in people's mental function. Imagine how smart we can be, huh? Just by changing the lighting. And also you see there, so there's much more to that. So floor space utilization I mentioned. Here you see a number of factors that play a role in workplace utilization, so flexible capacity and use of the floor space, different activities, and also comfort and well-being. So an office no longer is a factory which just had the conveyor belt missing. And as I mentioned, lighting is everywhere in the building. It's the most granular function everywhere around, inside buildings, outside buildings, in our homes. And that is also why last year we realized that with 30 billion light points being present worldwide, we had to launch, let's say we launched an open internet platform called Interact, so that there would not be a clutter in all kinds of applications that would be developed. For every application, this has a name. So Interact City for outdoor lighting, Interact Office for inside. And then the connectivity with the lighting can help you do lighting management, asset management, energy optimization, bioadaptive, so including circadian rhythm, and let's say the different functions we occupy during a day. But there's more to it, and that is what I mentioned in the beginning, because lighting can also carry data. So the lighting wavelength is like roughly 1,000 times smaller than the radio wavelength, radio broadband wavelength. And there we see like a huge congestion in broadband capacity and demand. Here you see it already. So over the next 7 years, demand in broadband will increase tenfold. And imagine how often we have issues being in a train or let's say anywhere else and connecting. And maybe even here, I think it's pretty good this year. But then in some places. So there, lighting can carry a huge amount of data. And we see there that it's not electromagnetic, it's lighting, so it has a number of advantages. One in security, because lighting doesn't go through walls, where Wi-Fi does. It's a reliable network, because you see the lighting is there. It cannot be interrupted by police, and let's say passing by, the issues we were explained yesterday. And that's why we launched True Li-Fi. And this can be designed to any application, so we look in functionality to the lighting vertical, so which functions related to lighting itself can be, but it's like the Android of lighting. So anyone who wants to develop an app on sensing air quality and transmitting that data to a city dashboard can do that. And here you see how fast things are developing. So there are 3 versions here already mentioned. So one simple version for office, 30 megabytes per second. Then let's say a somewhat more demanding function that goes up to 150. And for heavy industry, where electromagnetic interference for Wi-Fi is a huge issue, well, for lighting is no issue at all. And you can go up to 250 megabytes per second. So you see there, we launched it last year, and actually yesterday we were just, let's say, piloting technology. Today we're doing real projects with commercial customers. Tomorrow you see that Li-Fi will become a standard in portfolio for offices, and maybe a little bit beyond, and the future is almost now. You see that this will become a global communication standard next to Wi-Fi. So what I'm saying, there's a lot more to lighting than just energy. It is also helping us in many other ways. Thank you.
I'm going to wait till my name is up there. Okay. I had to wait till my name was up there. I'm trying to be a little more obedient. Okay. Open this in case I need it. Okay, thank you all for coming. I'm Pat Sapinsley. I run the Urban Future Lab at NYU Tandon School of Engineering. We're a mission-driven center that works to combat climate change by scaling up young companies who have market-ready clean tech solutions that can make the grid, the transportation sector, and the building sector run more cleanly and more efficiently. We run 5 programs at UFL. The first is the Acre Incubator, which scales up these companies. The second is PowerBridge, which helps to commercialize clean energy academic IP. Clean Start, which helps career changers to come into this sector. H2 Refuel, which scales up new hydrogen technologies. And NYPA Innovation, which helps to source EVs and storage for the NYPA grid. We have been unusually successful in our endeavors. 90% of our companies have survived since 2009. These are startups. That's really very unusual. But they face enormous challenges. The reason we've been so successful is that we create a community for them to work together. They influence each other. They help each other. We have a lawyer who comes in and helps them. We have accountants who come in and help them. We have a graphic designer on staff. We make introductions to channel to market partners, to customers, to funders, and the community itself, as I said, is very helpful. But the challenges that they face are really enormous. There are barriers thrown in front of them. There's a 2-year sales cycle for these industries, selling into utilities and real estate. We're working with corporate partners now to bring down those barriers, to make one-page contractual documents with them. And the other thing that can really help is the market pull provided by policy, as Mark outlined a few minutes ago. The policy in New York, 80 by 50, and the new CMA, and the New York State policy, the CLPA, will all help our companies to scale up. In Europe, they have a price on carbon. In California, a price on carbon. These things all help our companies. So I'm going to tell you about some of the companies now. The first one that you're going to see is called Avir. Avir automates construction inspections with LiDAR. The discrepancies between on-site reality and what's in the BIM drawings can be loaded up to a BIM document where all the trades can see them. Corrections are recommended, and this saves enormous time and construction waste. The next one is our storage company, Bren Miller Energy. They're a heat storage technology for distributed generation. Their thermal battery is a well-engineered box of hot rocks. During off-peak hours, they bring in surplus energy, store it as heat, and then send it out across a turbine to create heat during peak hours. It's inexpensive and has no technology risk. Go Electric is a battery and software company that was recently acquired by Saft. Its customers are large institutions, including army bases and hospitals. GoE can seamlessly shift loads from the grid to batteries, turning batteries into a revenue source by helping them to participate in demand management programs, peak reduction, and power factor correction. Malka is a software platform that manages, cleans up, and reports data across many types of sustainability programs. It's being used by the New Buildings Institute and the Institute for Market Transformation, as well as the 2030 District. It can clean up and report many types of data streams for individual buildings and large portfolios. PowerMarket is our community solar company. They do back office management and customer acquisition and billing solutions for utilities and renewable energy project developers. Their tool allows apartment dwellers like yourselves without roof access to buy locally sourced solar from arrays in nearby communities. Simuat is a comprehensive all-in-one auditing app that reduces multi-step procedures to deliver savings of 50% in time and services. Their software provides the auditor with instant on-site energy models, captures inefficient equipment, pulls in local incentive data, and can find local financing solutions all in one app. Clients include the City of New York, Dakin, GSA, and others. Radiator Labs, I'm not going to tell you about because Marshall's here and he's going to tell you all about them. But his company was incubated at Acre, and the local law 97 will help him a lot. Next up is Zero Energy Solutions. Zero is a control platform from Israel for hotels and other buildings with individual room HVAC units. It uses the information from end units' cooling and heating capacity, weather forecasts, end user routines to provide climate comfort in every room and send predictive maintenance information to management. It saves management headaches, hassles, and energy. Dandelion is our turnkey ground source heat pump solution for single-family homeowners. They manage the entire process, one neck to choke, all the trades included, and provides a financing mechanism to eliminate the upfront cost. Homeowners can have an entirely new energy-efficient system for $150 a month. Enertiv digitizes the physical infrastructure of commercial buildings. They provide real-time energy management by collecting energy data circuit by circuit and machine by machine. Enertiv offers asset optimization, M&V, predictive maintenance, and tenant sub-metering solutions. Sealed helps single-family homeowners to pay little to no upfront costs for improvements like insulation, air sealing, and new air source heat pumps, all paid for with our energy-saving dollars financed by the New York Green Bank. SEALD has partnerships with contractors and utilities statewide, including Con Ed and National Grid. Sistine Solar applies high-fidelity graphics onto solar panels while optimizing energy generation. The result is an array of high-efficiency solar panels of any color, shade, or pattern. These can be camouflaged with your adjacent roof, or they can provide advertising for your business. We couldn't do any of this without the sponsors that we have in New York. NYSERDA has been spectacular, supporting most of our work. Dakin also helps us. ORIC provides our startups with legal help. Wells Fargo funds our IN2 program with NREL. New York Community Trust and Con Ed support our annual Earth Day competition. Toyota and Shell have sponsored the hydrogen program, and we're working on sourcing innovative EVs and storage for NYPA with support from NYPA. If you want to know more, because this has been really fast, the URL is right there. All of our companies are on there. Our event on Thursday night will be about carbon to value. You can register for it on there. And you can sign up for our newsletter, which will keep you informed of events and let you know about new companies as they come in. Thank you.
We could start my presentation, that's fine, yeah. Steve Kukoda, Executive Director of the International Copper Association. When we think of copper, what do you see? Is it an open pit that you could see from space? Is it a chimney at a refinery? For many of our stakeholders, unfortunately, that's the end of the story, but it's not. Copper is closely linked to sustainable development, perhaps more so than any other metal or material. To produce a ton of copper, on average, we emit 3.5 tons of CO2. And again, for many stakeholders, that's the end of the story, but it's not. 70% of that copper will go into electrical applications, and because of copper's amazing efficiency, over their lifetimes, the products will emit between 100 and 7,500 less tons of CO2, mitigation of 22,000 to 2,000 to 1. And it's already in our most innovative technologies, especially clean energy, and because of this, McKinsey estimates 43% potential increase in copper demand by 2035. And copper has the highest conductivity of all non-precious metals, giving it a significant advantage over competing materials. An estimated 2/3 of the copper produced since 1900 is still in productive use. That's because it's completely recyclable without losing any of its properties, which is unique compared to other metals. And today, about 1/3 of annual demand is met with recycled copper. And there are 3 pillars to the clean energy transition: renewable energy, e-mobility, and energy efficiency. And you could measure this transition in kilos of copper. Renewable energy uses 4 to 12 times as much, EVs 3 to 4 times as much. And to make products more energy efficient, we need to use the best, most efficient conductors, and that's where copper plays a role. And I'm here because I build partnerships that people don't only see a mine when they think of copper, they see more. We build partnerships with governments, with industry, the UN, in advancing the SDGs. And in order of our program, on all 17 SDGs, in particular SDG 7, clean and affordable energy. And we're particularly strong in energy efficiency, which needs to account for nearly half of the actions in the Paris Agreement. And an example is the 3% Club, which was launched at the General Assembly on Monday. We're a founding partner that's helping governments and companies to make commitments to energy efficiency that are critical to climate change mitigation. If you're planning a building, it's a decision for 50 to 100 years. If you're choosing an inferior conductor, you're choosing to be less efficient. The more copper that's used in a building, the more efficient it is. I mean, it basically does more with less energy. And efficient buildings have a smaller carbon footprint and provide a healthier environment. Copper has 128 possible uses in green and healthy buildings, contributing to accreditation by LEED, ASHRAE, and WELL. And copper's versatility is a plus for better buildings, from structural necessities to aesthetic adornments, including roofing, wiring, plumbing, and lighting. And here are 7 ways to make buildings more efficient by using copper. First is electric vehicles. A 2017 report by the Institute for Electric Innovation estimated 5 million charging stations will be needed to support the 7 million EVs on the road by 2025. Copper has an important role in charging stations and EVs themselves, and copper wiring in EV charging stations ensures the fastest possible charging times. Active transportation through things like bicycle facilities. The sustainable building community can promote occupant wellness by encouraging alternative commuting methods. Both WELL and LEED promote showers and changing facilities, and copper in the supporting system makes them safer and environmentally sound. A third is reduced water use through metering and consumption management. 80% of all utilities choose copper for water service lines because it's reliable and recyclable. It doesn't allow dangerous contaminants to leach. It keeps treated water safe. If you follow the news, you know that this is a big issue in the United States and other parts of the world. And fourth is energy efficiency and management. As an example, ICA member Arubis and Enercity will be using industrial heat extracted during copper smelting to power the Hamburg district of Hafen City East. And using this heat will save 20,000 tons of CO2 a year, and it'll replace the natural gas currently used. Fifth is renewable energy. Commercial buildings can harness the benefits of on-site renewable energy and its cost savings advantages for owners and occupants. And copper is a critical component in solar energy systems due to its unique and inherent properties. It's also integral to the electrical generators, connections, protective grounding system in wind energy. And next is lighting and shading controls. The sustainable building community can provide natural light for wellness and productivity and shading for comfort. ASHRAE promotes office space shading, WELL recognizes both solar glare controls and automated shading controls, and LEED supports individual lighting and glare controls to adjust conditions according to tasks and preferences. And finally is indoor air quality. A study by the Healthy Building Program at Harvard concluded that even modest improvements to indoor environmental quality can have a profound impact on the performance of workers. ICA works with governments around the world to help them adopt minimum energy performance standards for air conditioners, public health, reduction of airborne bacteria and mold. And now let's talk about the future. We need investment. Energy efficiency is expected to meet about half of the Paris Agreement more than renewables or EVs, but the investment is only $250 billion a year. This needs to increase by 3 to 10 times. And this includes buildings. Half of the buildings in the developing world haven't been built yet. We have to get these new builds right. We also need more sustainable mining. The demand for metals will mean even more mining, even with more recycling. So it's vital that resources like copper are produced sustainably. And for this reason, ICA developed the Copper Mark, a program for assessing copper mines and refiners based on 31 production criteria so that consumers and investors can make informed decisions. And finally, governments need to put policies in place that only allow efficient buildings to be built and efficient appliances to be sold. If we use existing tech with the right policies and financing, things will get done. I don't believe in regulation for the sake of regulation, but by setting appropriate levels for MEPs for buildings and appliances, consumers and businesses have one less thing to worry about. So in conclusion, materials like copper have a critical role to play in the built environment and the clean energy transition in general. ICA recognizes copper's critical role, and we're seeking to build and expand partnerships that will make this goal a reality and advance the clean energy transition. So come find us. I'm an easy person to find so we can collaborate. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Marshall Cox. I'm here to tell you about Radiator Labs. I'll talk about why we think we're important to kind of addressing emissions in places like New York City. But essentially what we've done is we've solved a 100-year-old problem in building heating. And then I'll talk about why it's steam heat and why that's a big deal around the world, but more so in the United States on the eastern seaboard as well as some of the colder climates. So this is pretty obvious, I think, to this crowd, but our cities are somewhat wasteful. We use a lot of energy, a lot of attention gets paid to electricity, and that's a big deal, and we need to address it. But actually about 50% of the emissions from buildings are from heating. And if we really want to tackle emissions in cities like New York, we have to tackle heating. And of course, heating is where you're combusting fuel right there and you're breathing in whatever comes out. Over 70% of the carbon emissions from buildings, obviously. And again, heating is a very big part of that. So if we're going to solve this problem, let's look more closely at heating in places like New York City. In New York City, we're talking about steam heat. Steam is about 80% of the buildings in New York City. And when you look at any big city that was built before World War II, or a lot of it was built before World War II, you're talking about a lot of steam. And steam will be here, as was mentioned earlier today. These buildings are not getting replaced. 80% or 90% are going to be here in 2050. And if you look at the energetics of steam, 30% of the energy that you consume in steam is let out windows or overheating. So we really have to talk about how we fix that. One quick aside, why is steam so wasteful? This is a picture of Alexander Graham Bell. It's useful to contrast other technologies of the same age as steam heat. The telephone obviously has gone through a few different changes over the years. This is Alexander Graham Bell standing next to a steam radiator, if you look in the lower left of that picture. Literally nothing has changed in this industry. There's been people who tried for a very long time, but it's very hard to fix these problems. So what are we going to do to fix them? There's usually a few different ways. These are kind of three that I want to point out. Electrification, obviously, you really want to do this where you can, and there's a lot of attention on this. You always want to increase envelope. You might want to balance buildings. Steam is not going anywhere, so you really need to fix the root problem. And I'll talk about why one of these is probably the first step we need to take. Electrification is great. Heat pumps are awesome, but they're not very good for large building retrofits. They're extremely expensive, but besides that, if we had brownouts in the hottest days of the summer with 50% of buildings having AC in, like we do in New York City, if you had 12% of the buildings electrified with heat pumps, cold climate heat pumps, you'd have brownouts in the middle of the winter in the coldest days. So that's really not the best option for our buildings in cities like New York City. Envelopes, you always want to do this, but you can spend as much money as you want on a window, and if someone's overheated because they have steam heat and there's an imbalance in the building, they're going to open that window and it's off or not. So to address the problem of heating efficiency in New York, you have to talk about balancing these systems because they're not being replaced. And I'm going to tell you about what we've done. Historically, people try to address this problem with plumbing. That's not the way to fix it. It's very hard to solve a two-phase liquid gas distribution system with valves. So we've developed a new way. We call it the thermostatic radiator valve. Sorry, that's not what we call it. That's the competitor. We talk about thermostatic radiator enclosures. What we're trying to do here in these buildings is we want to stop steam from condensing in hot rooms. It's an enormous balancing act, and it always has been. What we do is we've developed a way to do it without contact with plumbing. You just put these things over the radiators, and by letting the air around radiators heat up, you can indirectly control the condensation rate in those radiators. That's exactly what you need to do, and it allows us to do some pretty cool other things I'll talk about in a second. Technology is really simple. It's an insulating enclosure, thermostatically controlled fan. These systems measure various things in the room at all times, relay that data to the cloud. We can do cool things with that as well. We've seen 25% savings on average. The temperature and comfort improvements are dramatic. We are third-party verified. NYSERDA studied our first 7 deployments for 5 years. The average savings was 25%. That savings has remained over the course of our entire relationship with them. We don't install these things and run away. It lasts a very long time. And this is a big deal. Think about 25% savings in all the buildings in New York. That's what we're talking about. Beyond that, everyone who's involved in what we do loves it. 95% fewer heating complaints. Think about that. It's dramatic for people who live there. 85% fewer maintenance calls because we're always watching what's going on. We tell people when things are going wrong before they become an issue. And then again, 25% average savings. So when we talk to people who are stakeholders in this, we talk about different things, right? Owners can immediately make 10% more in operating income by our technology. They can meet cost emissions reductions cost effectively, which is what is required for these kind of things to happen. Management's happy for a lot of reasons, and tenants, I want to point this out again, they can control their temperature, including set points and schedules for the first time in the history of this building stock. So it's a very big deal for them. Where are we today? We're mostly in New York City. We were founded here out of Columbia University about 7 years ago. We're in a few different states along the eastern seaboard. After that NYSERDA report came out last year, we've expanded significantly, about 500%, just in the last 12 months. And we work with a lot of larger customers you probably know. 2 quick case studies. This is Columbia University. The first 2 buildings we deployed, we saved, I think, like 42% and 36% or something like that. Again, maintained over the entire course of those installments, still saving that much energy. These are long-term relationships. But I want to point out that we're not stopping there. There are other things we're doing here, enabled by kind of the cool things we can do. So first, we have a hunk of metal in a big insulated box. We can store thermal energy in that box. We can use our technology to enable peak shaving and demand response in space heating in New York City. That's an enormous deal for natural gas pipelines and district steam systems. Utilities, this is a really big deal for, and we're working to help alleviate some of the issues with natural gas distribution. Similarly, we combine that storage capability with electrification of the boiler itself, which is super easy to do, super low cost, and allows us to maintain the natural gas consumption capability, which you're going to want on the coldest days of the year. This gives us a flex fuel boiler, flex back between electricity and natural gas, store energy and shift those peaks. It's a really big deal for resiliency and keeping costs down. So to summarize, that was a lot. I speak really fast. Apologies for that. Steam heat is the largest single line item waste in U.S. buildings. It wastes more energy than anything else in U.S. buildings. It's not going anywhere. You have to address this technology to increase efficiencies in our larger cities like New York City. And we do that. We enable some cool things like demand response, peak shaving, electrification. And there's a lot more than that. Please check us out online. Come find me afterwards. There's my email address, etc. Thank you very much. And have a great rest of the Pikachu presentations.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Victoria Burrows. I am the Director of Advancing Net Zero for the World Green Building Council. And I'm here today to talk to you about our initiative, the Net Zero Carbon Buildings Commitment, and why buildings are so crucial in our fight against climate change. Good? Okay. So buildings are a critical solution in the fight against climate change. They are responsible for 39% of global carbon emissions, 50% of global material resources, and we spend 90% of our time in them, using all the energy it takes to heat, cool, and power them. But they also offer the greatest opportunity to tackle the emissions and our solution to climate change. Therefore, the World Green Building Council is calling for 100% net zero carbon buildings by 2050, with all new buildings operating at net zero from 2030. We need an urgent net zero response to buildings in order to reduce our carbon emissions and provide that solution to climate change. Advancing Net Zero is a global campaign to accelerate uptake to 100% net zero carbon buildings, working with our network of green building councils from across 70 countries, in particular with 25 green building councils in key markets, committed to taking action to develop industry capacity to reach these solutions. What does net zero carbon mean? Well, for us, it's actually very simple. It's highly energy efficient buildings powered by 100% renewable energy. And those two key principles form the basis of our Advancing Net Zero framework. The other two principles are that we're talking about operational carbon. So that's buildings in use, the way they are actually performing based on metered data and their operational consumption. So we're shifting focus to how buildings actually perform in their operation, and also the opportunity to expand the scope beyond the focus on operational carbon into other areas such as embodied carbon. Buildings represent the best opportunity for low-cost emission reduction from any of these other sectors, from the low-cost emission reductions shown by the orange bars, more than agriculture, industry, forestry, transport, and waste. So they're the greatest opportunity for implementation of things like energy efficiency and improving energy productivity. So our net zero carbon buildings commitment that was launched last year represents leadership from corporate and private sector towards achieving a large-scale response to net zero carbon buildings, to set their own bespoke roadmaps to net zero and influence others to develop strategies to reduce further emission reductions. We produce profiles like this on our website that helps explain how those companies intend to take action throughout their own portfolios, but also advocate for other reductions, such as Salesforce here, with operations in 26 countries across the world, committed to net zero buildings by 2030, but also to improving the energy performance of their buildings as well. We have design firms such as Integral Group, who are not only committed to achieving net zero carbon across their own portfolios of design spaces across the world, but also to work with their clients to offer a net zero option on every single project that they design as a design firm, which is where their true impact lies. But we also have developers. So traditionally, developers may not be the immediate example for net zero carbon buildings because they tend to sell the assets quite quickly. But in this case, a UK developer is committed to a net zero carbon transition plan and ensuring their buildings perform at net zero long after they've been sold to their tenants. So we have over 60 signatories to the commitment, from corporate entities, from cities, from states and regions all across the world. And we have 25 green building councils that are actively working to support those signatories in delivering their commitments. The Net Zero Carbon Building Commitment represents a pathway towards EP 100 membership. And we are pleased to announce today that we have additional signatories that are joining us, and several of them here are also becoming EP 100 members as of this morning. So congratulations to these organizations, representing real estate entities, developers, contractors, design firms, and materials manufacturers. So net zero really is for everyone. We produced a status report recently that outlined the value proposition, so not just the business case, but where does the value lie from an owner-occupier developer perspective, both in real estate value, but also delivering a good and genuine product to customers, but also some of the examples of government action that's being taken at policy level, at city, state, regional, and national level to help drive this transition. But the public sector and regulators really rely on the private sector to take that action first and take those first steps forward to demonstrate our theory of change. This is based on businesses, governments, and NGOs all taking steps towards net zero carbon buildings to stimulate greater uptake from the market, to foster innovation, skills and capacity, and boost the economy to achieve deeply energy efficient buildings and ultimately mass delivery of net zero carbon buildings. And that, we believe, relies on a strategy that places technology, collaboration, and new financial models at the center of your triple bottom line approach, so that's people, planet, and profit, to ensure that the solutions being applied in these projects are sustainable and provide long-term performance standards. Technology, therefore, enables this transition, whether it's through building integrated modeling or designing for assembly, to optimize resource consumption during the design of the projects, or basing them on performance metrics for how the buildings will actually perform, automating buildings in use to ensure that those performance standards are sustained and the opportunities to reduce energy consumption are identified. We just today, or Monday, and we have just come from the launch event in the Empire State Building, released a report called Bringing Embodied Carbon Up Front, which is now looking at achieving the same sort of traction, but for addressing embodied emissions, so calling for bold action and radical collaboration to addressing emissions from the material and construction sectors. Thank you very much. If you would like more information, then please do contact us. All of the signatory profiles for the Net Zero Carbon Buildings Commitment are on our website. Thank you very much for your time.
Hello, everyone. I'm Remi Lee from TCI. I'm the CSO and also the spokesman for TCI. First of all, probably like most of you never heard of TCI, but some of you can just use the product that made and designed by us, such as the facial masks by Sephora, or the some supplement provided by some top 10 like direct sales companies. So first of all, we've been thinking, like back to 5 years ago, we've been thinking like what the private sector can do, or what a business like TCI, the ODM, can do. We're thinking a lot of the methodology, to going sustainable. Like we put the solar panel, and we're going for the circular economy. So quick look on our business model. Turn waste into gold. So we're making the extraction from all the like banana peel, banana flowers. So for example, take one of the big hit, the banana, Happy Banana. This is a product. This is a product to relieve the insomnia, and you probably feel like the extraction from some of the weird, the shell or the peel. Is it safe? Is it editable? Is it edible? Yes, of course. So I would like to take the example for the Taiwanese species, red quinoa. For the red quinoa, we use the husk for making the supplement, and we use the dregs of the red quinoa to do the organic noodles. And then what we do for the residual after extraction is we're making the organic composting by fermenting those extraction of residual, and along with the very special patented strains. So quick review for the Taiwanese, the renewable energy situation. Currently, like 96% accounts for the, from fossil fuel, only 4% from renewable. So for TCI, the concept is very, very simple. We just put the solar panel on each of our facility, especially for the newly built up in Salt Lake City and in Shanghai, Jinshan. So you can have a quick look on the very first one, and I believe it still be the only one in this world, the USGBC LEED certification facial mask in Taiwan, in the southest part of Taiwan. So you can easily see the metal grids and solar panel on the top, and double layer insulating glasses on the top. And we have the fair face concrete, to avoid the heat transmission and something like that. And for those who with the additional funding or the company making profit, they can easily done that. But for TCI, we are very greedy to, fight with the climate issue. So recently, I'm very glad to, hear some of my colleagues, and they just keep saying that, hey, I want to buy something, for the marine sustainable collagen. I want to use some of the packaging that is biodegradable. I want to use EVOH, put on our packaging. And luckily, some of our clients and more clients are willing to, coordinate and cooperate with TCI, a Taiwanese company, especially from the huge branding company, from Europe and from US. So they share the same value with us. So, in the very beginning, the reason we spend a lot of money on the LEED certification facility is not really to, set the entry barrier. But now it's kind of like we enjoy the advantage of the competitiveness, and that is why we can, enjoy the 45% gross margin, like for last year and on 2017. And this is a very interesting program that we coordinate with the local government to, make the afforestation, and especially we just invite the students in the in the remote area to coordinate with this program. So that is very successful, and we're keeping doing that. And for this picture, you can see our future expansion in Salt Lake City in the right, and for the left one is in Shanghai, Jinshan. So a lot of the client, they make the on-site tour, so we just build up our own, the VR on-site system. So in the coming future, we are going to cooperate with a big name company in Taiwan, and then we are going to set up the battery swap station in Pingdong, and to encourage all of the community and our employees to use the electric vehicles. And lucky enough, we are invited to join the RE100 by 2018, and to be the member of the EP100 by this year. And proudly to say we have already reached renewable energy 17%, mostly by plant our own solar panels on the top. But that is simply not enough, especially in Taiwan, because we have really rare resourcing of the renewables. So what we do is simple. We can just buy the T-REC and I-REC currently for the short term to reach 30%. And also, we are the very first company to sign the PPA, after the passing of the new Renewable Energy Act in this April. So in the end, I would love to say that we want to, not for us to making ourselves to reach 100 renewable, but also we would like to, making the voice to some other OEM or ODM company in Taiwan, and they can follow us, and then we can just going green together, and we believe TCI can help. Thank you for the time. Thank you.
Really warm thanks to Mark, to Harry, Pat, Steve, Marshall, Victoria, and Remi. So clear the wealth of opportunities and approaches that have been taken by these different organisations. I suppose it's difficult to pick on any specific points, but I was struck particularly on the data side by sort of two related pieces from Victoria, with buildings being the biggest source by far of low-cost emission reduction opportunities. And then, of course, from Harry, $17 trillion of opportunity from buildings efficiency. The question for now, for the next piece today, is how are we going to seize those opportunities? What's the role of collaboration? And how can policy support and catalyse action? Really pleased that we have Bryony Collins to help guide us through that discussion. Bryony is an editor at Bloomberg NEF in London. She writes and edits a lot on topics related to the clean energy transition. And very recently there's been pieces on energy efficient buildings, electric heating, air conditioning, decarbonising the cement industry. Terrific to have her to help this conversation. Welcome, Bryony.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for having me to the Climate Group. So I'm here to discuss opportunities for collaboration with different stakeholders in the building industry. I'll be introducing them shortly, but just to set the scene for improving building efficiency in the sector. I'd like to ask, what do the home of the Chicago Bears, Shanghai Tower, and Facebook HQ all have in common? They're all LEED certified buildings recognized for their commitment to be energy efficient, to reduce waste, and to improve the health and productivity levels of their inhabitants. Buildings account for about 40% of CO2 emissions globally, and for as much as 70% of emissions in cities such as New York, London, and Paris. So efforts to improve building efficiency are fundamental if we are to achieve the goals set out underneath the Paris Agreement. Public policy is moving in the right direction. New York's Climate Mobilization Act, launched in April, sets out a target for the city's largest buildings to collectively reduce their CO2 emissions 40% by 2030. And some 19 cities around the world, including LA, London, and Sydney, have committed to net zero carbon new builds by 2030. Getting there won't be easy. It will require collective will from different stakeholders in the building industry, from developers to financiers to policymakers, plus a host of new technologies to drive the industry forward. Rooftop solar, LED lighting, and water conservation are some of the options available today. The green building industry has lots of potential to create new jobs and to clean up the air in the cities in which we live. The transition to low-carbon buildings should be seen as an opportunity rather than a burden. I'm going to discuss some of these opportunities now with stakeholders in the building industry. So I'd like to welcome first Daniel Egan, who is Senior Vice President of Energy and Sustainability at Vornado Realty Trust. Vornado Realty Trust is an owner and operator of retail and office buildings in New York City. Hi, Daniel, welcome.
Thank you.
Next, we have Dany Qian, Vice President of Jinko Solar, which is the world's largest solar panel manufacturer in terms of module shipment. So Dany will be able to speak to us about opportunities for rooftop solar and also some of the things that the company is doing itself on its own operations. Then we have Richard Yancey, Executive Director at the Building Energy Exchange, which is an organization here in New York City that informs the real estate community about efficiency opportunities in buildings. And lastly, we have Marta Subera, Secretary for Environment and Sustainability in the government of Catalonia. So Marta will be able to speak to us about opportunities in Western Europe for building efficiency. So thanks everybody for joining today. First of all, I'd like to discuss the kinds of innovations in technology that are available today and could be available in the future to really drive forward change. Daniel, would you like to start off first of all in talking about technology?
Sure, absolutely. And so representing the real estate industry, I think that we are charged with the transition movement to the net zero environment for our buildings. And I think that what we need to be armed with is a very reliable set of data that indicates what decisions actually help us transition our buildings in the direction towards net zero. In a typical building that we own, we have many different decision makers within the building that are consuming energy, and then we have the world around us that will be delivering that energy with a different mix of fuels that over time will transition to low or zero carbon. And I think what would be the most helpful during this transitional period is to have the awareness, not just of who's consuming the energy within the building and why and when, but also how do those decisions correlate with the layer of real-time carbon intensity of the energy being delivered to the building. Because I think this transition cannot happen overnight, unfortunately, but it needs to happen in a gradual approach that understands both the workings in the building as well as what's happening in the grid around us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point about having to have that collaboration between the energy providers and the building managers themselves. Dany, would you like to speak a bit about the technology innovations that Jinko Solar is bringing forward?
Thanks to the technical advance, the renewable energy, particularly solar, power cost has dropped dramatically in the past 3 to 5 years. So when we solve the first problem of renewables cost, then comes the second, intermittent energy and energy efficiency. So we still need lots of the technical innovations to bring to accelerate this shift. For example, the high efficient solar building materials, solar tile, solar walls, solar roofs, solar facade, BIPV, BAPV, etc., to fully utilize the service of building for power generation. And second, like the passive building technology. Passive solar cooling, heating, ventilation, solar lighting, and also the energy collection, recycling, and the redistribution. And also we need and we working on the low cost and the large capacity energy storage. For example, the big stationary battery packs that can be integrated with on-site renewable source to make the buildings empowered by the renewables 24 hours and 7 days.
Thank you, that's really interesting. So the battery packs, is that one of the products that Jinko Solar offers at the moment, Dany? Do you offer battery packs as part of your solar offering?
Yes.
Okay. And have you had quite a lot of interest from large corporations that own buildings in that kind of solar and battery partnership offering?
Yes, we are collaborate with some big energy storage company, also the building materials companies to working on this the total solution.
Okay, great, thank you. And Richard, what kind of, have you had much response from the people that participate in your organization? Are they interested in the battery and solar offering more and more?
Well, what I wanted to talk about first was, since you kind of asked what's the kind of technology that is most exciting, and I think when we saw a lot of the presentations this morning and listening to some of the work of my colleagues on the panel here, there's a lot of really exciting technologies out there, and some of them are ready to install and some of them are in the making, and I think this issue that Dan brought up of understanding the data in relation to them is critical. And so to me, and this is our bias here at the Building Energy Exchange, a critical piece of that is education. And I think people need to have a baseline of confidence in both the performance of these technologies and in the costs of them and in what it takes to install them. Because I think the reality is we know how to make our buildings more efficient in terms of the actual kind of nuts and bolts in a lot of ways, but actually getting to making them more efficient requires educating a whole bunch of different and diverse stakeholders in the building industry in terms in our ability to accelerate that transition. So whether it's solar panels or battery storage or data analytics, I think at the end of the day, there's an educational piece that's critical. And on top of that, I think this issue of the people who use the energy versus the people who own the buildings isn't always aligned. And I think one of the key opportunities is to figure out how to make more specific alignments between the building tenants, for instance, and the building owners, and to bring those two together in terms of being able to work together to make that entire building much more energy efficient.
Okay, thank you very much. Marta, what kind of technology innovations are you seeing happening in Europe?
Well, I think that we've seen a very nice range of innovations here today. I want to thank the Climate Group for organizing this session and for allowing us to learn so much from different companies and different initiatives. In fact, the government of Catalonia endorsed the initiative Advancing Net Zero last year in San Francisco. So we think that this is one of the most critical issues in order to tackle climate change. From the government perspective, I think all around Europe, I think Europe is doing their job in order to tackle climate change. The government of Catalonia, for example, just passed a climate change law, the first of the south of Europe, and declared the climate emergency last May. And recently has passed a package of urgent measures to accelerate the fight against climate change. And one of the things that we've seen is that there are a lot of regulation that sometimes go against this. So maybe it's old regulation that we need to improve, to change, and some of them affect buildings, for example, and technology that could be applied, or maybe the solar panels that need to be installed in buildings. Sometimes the urban planning doesn't allow to make buildings taller, and they count the solar panels as more tall, the height of the building. So this is something that nowadays has no sense. So we need to change that. It's not easy, but we now know what we have to do. So we are doing many things that I hope I can explain later as well.
Great, thank you very much. So let's talk a bit more about collaboration between stakeholders, because Richard, you brought up how tenants and owners need to kind of collaborate more. Have you seen any examples of successful collaboration yet in that regard?
Yeah, I think there are lots of examples. And I think two that come to mind that I like are on opposite ends of the spectrum. So one of our colleague organizations called Green City Force works predominantly inside New York City's public housing buildings. These large, huge New York buildings that were built mostly in the 40s and 50s, and are mostly subsidized housing. And what they do is they have a program where they actually reach in to the youth in those buildings and educate them on energy efficiency. And so the youth, actually the community, goes around and knocks on doors and tells people about changing their light bulbs or installing low flow fixtures to save water, and just generally about energy efficiency. And so it's kind of raising, I think, the whole community's consciousness about being more efficient with the way they live. And then on the other end of the spectrum, I think Dan probably has some examples of this too, but there's some great examples of major tenants in buildings that probably own their own meter, collaborating with the building owner to install super efficient HVAC systems, and thereby kind of splitting the costs, sharing the savings, and they've been able to kind of incentivize themselves. It's been part of their mission as well as an organization, but then being able to reach out to that building owner and find a way to actually influence the structure and the systems in the building that tenants usually just take for granted.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. So, Daniel, have you seen a collaboration on this heating and ventilation with tenants?
Certainly, and so Vornado is a owner and manager of our real estate. So we are also the face of the building with all of our tenants, and for many reasons, financial, aspirational, and now regulatory, we are very concerned with how the behavior in our tenant spaces translates to energy consumption and the related carbon emissions. So, for example, this week, for the second year in a row, we're hosting an energy challenge in one of our buildings that has sort of the right prototype of tenant space distribution, so they're relatively comparable spaces with one another. And what's interesting that we learned last year, and results will tell if the same challenges are in place this year, tenants themselves, and in our case these are office tenants, which represent many companies, of very diverse backgrounds, they themselves have the same organizational challenges that we have as a landlord with all of our tenants. And so, coming out of a story or out of the challenge last year, we heard from, one tenant that had a high degree of operational control over all of their space and was able to control temperature set points and lighting loads and even the plug loads, even the computers, going to sleep at the end of the night. They were enormously successful in this reduction. We had another tenant where none of those operational controls are in place, so it was really word of mouth of how, convincing people to make a conscientious decision to change their behavior. They had mixed success. We had a third tenant who had built out a wonderfully low energy space, had lots of green building certification for their space. However, they had on-site data, so they had a very high energy intensity. And having a challenge like this where they thought they were the shoo-in, the leader for this, and they saw that they actually had work to do, really for them elevated the issue of making that decision about on-site data versus cloud-based offices. And so, to the extent that we as the landlord are learning these type of nuances through an event such as this, helps us apply these lessons across the rest of our portfolio. We talk to prospective tenants about what are you thinking about putting in your space, what does your operating hours look like, and how can these sort of lessons learned, how can we pass those on to our other tenants to help them understand what contributes to a true low carbon space over time.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much. That's a good way of comparing different spaces and encouraging people to share ideas. Marta, have you had any successful collaboration examples in Catalonia?
Yes, I think one of the most extraordinary things that are happening is that there is a kind of revolution among citizens trying to establish new collaborative or collaborative economy energy companies that challenge a little bit the traditional energy companies in terms of renewable energies. They see some of the citizens that they are not being given what they want in terms of renewable energies. So they have started new collaborative energy companies that are working very, very well, that they are growing very, very fast, and they are providing only renewable energies. And they are also collaborating in establishing wind plants, and also solar panel plants. And we've seen this kind of bottom-up revolution among citizens that we think it's very, very interesting in order to provide transparency, more democracy in terms of energy awareness as well. We think that if people know better, as they were saying with all the data systems, but if they know what they are spending and what they are wasting in terms also of energy, they will be more able to change to a more efficiency or a more efficient model.
Great, that's really interesting. So like more of a grassroots kind of movement.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And traditional energy companies are seeing that and are trying to respond to these new initiatives, and also they are trying also to modernize their systems of transparency, of making people aware of what they are spending. And I think by this means, the change can be made more quickly.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much. Dany, can I ask you a bit about the number one barrier that you see as an organization in accelerating building efficiency?
I think for us, the number one barrier is the waste of energy and difficult for better energy management. Mm-hmm. So to address these problems, we have first redesign our factory layout and optimizing our manufacturing process to better energy collection, recycling, redistribution, and reusage. And also we installed the smart meters, the sensors, automated systems for demand management. And also we replaced the heavy load electric device and production equipment with the smart and energy-saving ones. But even though we are very conservative in our use of energy and very effective with recycling and all sorts of things, but we cannot eliminate it. So we plan to move or establish our new facilities in rich renewable source regions, rich in solar, in wind, in hydropower or hybrid, to make more use of renewables.
Okay, thank you. Which regions are richest in renewables in terms of your manufacturing capacity, and which regions are less rich? So where in the world do you use a lot of renewable energy for manufacturing solar panels, and where in the world is it more difficult to do so?
So take China, for example, that China northwest region is rich in solar and wind. China west-south region is rich in hydro. So this year we established 2 gigawatt scale factories in northwest China and also the western south China to utilize the local hydro and solar and wind.
Great. So you're kind of targeting those regions with higher clean energy. Good. And Daniel, is the kind of problem with wasting energy, is that something that you see a lot with real estate here in the city?
Yes, Mark Chambers very eloquently said earlier that the existing building stock of today in New York, we're an old, mature city, and so we have inherited a set of buildings that were built during a variety of different eras of construction and architecture. Many of those eras did not have energy efficiency among their topmost concerns, and so it creates a unique set of challenges in that we have a very diverse portfolio of buildings, each of whom has their own opportunity for waste. That could be design-driven or operations-driven, and so tackling each of those buildings individually is really the only approach that we have when it comes to energy productivity. And so an additional challenge I would also say is we need to start to transition the approach to return on investment when it comes to energy efficiency. I think that there has always been a traditional notion of investing in energy efficiency for cost savings. That is still part of the equation. However, it's so much more nuanced now. I think that the Climate Mobilization Act in New York City has added a value stream of avoided penalties, for example, to energy efficiency projects. The EPA came out with a benefits per kWh for the improvement that energy efficiency has on public health, depending on the region and the country. So you have social metrics that are starting to be part of the equation. And so, how do we start to take those value streams and think more, encourage ourselves to be more, to think more deeply about retrofit opportunities in energy efficiency, knowing that there's so much more value in addition to the traditional operational cost savings. So happy to collaborate with anyone in the room on that topic.
Yeah, because I've heard that with the Climate Mobilization Act, there's a potential that there will be a penalty put on carbon emissions over that cap. So do you think that's going to put excess kind of strain on the real estate industry?
I think it's inspiring a lot of action and creativity. I think we're put on a trajectory, and local policy has always been successful in this. They put achievement years and goals, and we respond accordingly as an industry. The mayor's office in 2016, for example, had a carbon challenge for commercial landlords and tenants. That inspired us to be more public about our energy reduction goal and align our goal with what's put forth in the city. The Climate Mobilization Act is designed within the framework of the climate scenario that was released in the IPCC publication. So you have a framework to understand goals and plan accordingly. There is a lot of work to be done. I think there's a lot of collaboration among the industry to figure out these solutions. But certainly, I don't think anyone thinks that these penalties are an indicator of success. It's actually, unfortunately, would mean that the carbon savings weren't achieved. So yes, we're avoiding the penalties, but with a much more collaborative approach.
Okay, thank you. And Richard, from your experience with working with lots of different organizations, do you think that the Climate Mobilization Act will be achieved kind of collaboratively with newer buildings, maybe able to go one step further than older buildings where it's that much harder to achieve the energy savings, make things energy efficient?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that there's a definite difference between new buildings and existing buildings. And a lot of I think the impetus for the act itself was really to focus on existing buildings, but the reality is all the entire building stock gets swept up, at least those buildings over 25,000 square feet, which is over half of New York City square footage, in the requirements of the act. And I think currently, the building codes are trying to catch up. The fact is, right now, if you build a code compliant, which just means it's not illegal, let's be clear, building, or even maybe a LEED silver building, you may not comply with the carbon cap. So I think there needs to be a focus on making sure the entire kind of team, design development team, is with the current building stock that's kind of coming out of the ground or about to come out of the ground, has their eye on what they're going to have to do. And I think, as we see, there's a lot of technology out there that that can be put into these buildings in new construction, which is a much more straightforward process in the kind of design stream. But then when it comes to the existing buildings, I think there's where a lot of the real challenge lies. And I do think that, again, there is a lot of technology that's available. There's a lot of simple things like improving the envelope that is easy to understand, but maybe very costly or very hard to do with tenants in the building. And I think a lot of those challenges need to really be understood, and we need to go find some, examples that can kind of lead the way. Especially, I'm more concerned personally about commercial buildings than kind of residential multifamily buildings. I think those solutions are better understood. But the high intensity uses in commercial buildings, I think those solutions for existing buildings are going to be some of the most challenging.
Yeah, thank you very much. I definitely think that's the case in London, where we have such an old building stock. So a question for all of you: if you could create a silver bullet policy to fully decarbonize the world's building stock by 2050, do you have any ideas about what that might be?
Well, I don't know if it's a silver bullet, but some years ago, maybe 30 years ago, in Barcelona, there was a wonderful initiative that was very, very successful about cleaning the facades of the city, about putting Barcelona prettier. In fact, the initiative was called like this: Barcelona, get yourself prettier. I don't know if this is the exact translation. Barcelona, posa't guapa. Barcelona, ponte guapa. And it was really successful. The city at that time was a little bit down, and this initiative from the city council make the people prouder of their city. And there was also a kind of jealousy or challenge among the different buildings that all of them wanted to be prettier and to be better. So maybe something like this in cities, and so challenging the owners, the tenants, to be really the front runners in this kind of initiatives. Of course, from the government perspective, as we see how things are going, incentives and fiscal initiatives must help to do this. In that time, there was a big amount of money from the government of Catalonia, from the government of the city, put in this initiative, and it was co-financed between the government and the owners. So something like this. We have seen that subsidies not always are successful in order of making buildings more efficient, because usually they don't pay an enough amount of money for the cost of the works. So the government is now launching a credit line for homeowners associations, and we hope that this initiative that will be launched before the year ends will be enough to make a real change in our region. And we will see, but things that challenge people and that make them, of course, aware of what they are wasting and what they can safe as well. I think this is a very good point. People must know that with a more efficient building, they will save money as well. So that's a good thing to do.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so something that inspires people and kind of encourages them to do something.
I think so. With this climate emergency awareness that we have right now, I think that we have to take this opportunity and do whatever is in our hands to take this moment and improve the world we have.
Thank you. Richard, do you have an idea for a silver bullet policy?
I think the silver bullet is a little bit of a red herring. I think it's been said before, but I do think it's really silver buckshot. But if I had to choose a silver bullet, I would talk about demand. And I think it kind of builds on this, competitions like this. I think demand has to come with education and awareness, and it kind of also talks about this asset valuation piece that Dan brought up. But I think we found at the Building Energy Exchange, we did this study almost 5 years ago about energy efficient lighting control systems, and they weren't going into commercial buildings in a retrofit scenario, although there was a lot of energy and money that could be saved by doing it. They weren't going in at scale, I should say. And so the study found that New Yorkers could save like $70 million a year just by turning the lights off, essentially, in daylit spaces. And so we started this social media initiative called the Daylight Hour, where we asked building tenants, not the owners, but building tenants to sign up and agree to turn off their lights for just 1 hour on the summer solstice, and then tweet about it on social media, take pictures. And we started this kind of on the back of a napkin, and it totally went viral. And last year we had 20 offices in 24 different countries, over 150 million square feet, 850 different offices, all turning their lights off, and it had an impact of over 10 million on social media. And so it's little initiatives like that. And typically a commercial tenant, a worker in a building has no relationship to their energy usage. And so kind of making that connection, I think, is really important. And then the other kind of demand piece, I think, is really this kind of cracking the nut on this asset valuation. All of these other things, health and comfort and productivity, aren't really computed in the asset valuation, in essence, of the energy efficiency project and the kind of return on that investment. And once that starts to happen at scale, I think we'll see a huge rapid increase in the demand for those kind of improvements.
Okay, thank you. Daniel, do you see things starting to change at all in terms of asset valuation and buildings being valued more if they are energy efficient?
I do. There's certainly the traditional approach to asset valuation where we are proving out the permanent operational cost savings that are achieved through energy efficiency. We're all about leasing space, and we want to make sure that our spaces are desirable for the most competitive tenants, whether office or retail. And because of that, we pay very close attention to the needs of the office employee. I would say that last week's youth climate protest was a market signal. We have a very well-educated, angry, young group of constituents that have very sophisticated demands about climate change mitigation. They understand the linkages between energy efficiency and health, or renewable energy and perhaps socioeconomics. And they are very young right now. They're certainly not going to be young for long. They are going to be voters and taxpayers and entering the workforce before you know it. So we have a policy framework around us that is encouraging or forcing us into certain positions, but you're going to see a very powerful group of stakeholders emerge that have very much the same demands and with the same level of sophistication. So, when it comes to valuation of assets, I think folks will really start asking very informed questions that differentiates one building from the other in terms of their relationship with energy, because they'll understand the linkage there to climate, to health and productivity and all these other things. So it's a very exciting time. It's extraordinary to see, what's happening with the generation coming up.
Yes, thank you very much. So you expect it to become higher and higher up the agenda with the evaluation. Okay, thank you. And Dany, how about things in China in terms of the youth movement and kind of asking for more focus on energy efficiency and climate change solutions? Do you see policy in China kind of taking account of that? And does that feed into what Jinko Solar is doing?
I think, first of all, don't underestimate China's ability to get things done, as long as our government really wants to do it. So I think the fundamental thing is the regulatory requirements. The policy should be aligned with the target. So in China, in 2017, China started its national emission trading system. And last year, we set policies to raise their building standards and the codes to require all the suitable rooftops should be utilized for solar power generation or other renewables, to adopt other renewables. So, and also I think the government should fix the incentive structure to make sure that their buildings are incented towards adopting sustainable versus unsustainable technology. And also, I propose that whether is it possible that we conduct some kind of their energy and the carbon audit, mandatory carbon data measure and disclosure to redesign the evaluation system to assess the value of the asset and the buildings. Because in the past, when we evaluate the value of a building or asset is location, function, building material, design. So whether is it possible to add like the carbon footprints or carbon data as KPIs or as criteria to evaluate the value of the asset.
Thank you. So you see that happening also in China, like a move towards factoring that into valuation. Thank you very much. Okay, so we have about 5 minutes now for any questions. Would people like to put their hands up if they'd like to ask a question? Yeah, the gentleman here. Would you maybe like to just speak it out and then I'll...
I can speak it. My name is Benoit. I come from Paris. I represent an international organization dedicated to energy efficiency. I come from a country, France, where there's a commitment to go carbon neutral by 2050, like many other countries, like 60 countries in this world. And France, over the past 30 years, 20 years, 10 years, put in place very aggressive policy on buildings with a series of incentives to address new buildings, but existing buildings. At the current pace of effort, my country, France, will take 1,200 years to meet its 2050 target on buildings. I see smiles here. Make your calculation where you come from. Germany, more advanced than France, will take 500 years to meet its 2050 target just on buildings. I haven't heard this morning ideas in line with this. We need to change the way we think. The policy, the incentive, voluntary program don't work. Incentive, even financial incentive, are not enough. Even when sometimes we offer 90% of subsidies to homeowners, they don't make the change. We have to declare war against climate change and develop the means. So when I see a big disconnect between the beautiful solution we heard in the first part of the presentation and the policy response to get there. So anyway, this is just an offer to maybe engage another conversation now in face of those young people in the street. If we, the energy efficiency community, don't get the right proposal with the right narrative to scale up the technical package with the financial package, and who will in this world. So anyway, I would be very happy to connect with you all to discuss. There are ways to get there, but I haven't heard that. The problem is not so much on the technical or the financial solution, it's on the narrative and around the policy package that we have to put in place.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much. Richard or Marta, would you like to comment on this? What do you think are the most effective ways to try and get fast action?
Well, I think first of all, I appreciate the comment greatly, and I certainly appreciate the emotion and the sentiment. The reality here in New York is, we passed benchmarking laws in 2009 that started to track the energy usage of our buildings, and there were no requirements put on top of that, and people started to see their energy usage, but they didn't act on it. And essentially, that's how we got to passing this bill in April, which may not be fast and hard enough, but it's a pretty major step for New York, and it's going to be pretty disruptive to the real estate community, and it affects over half of New York City square footage in terms of putting penalties on buildings that don't meet certain carbon emission caps starting in 2024. They get more stringent in 2030. They get even more stringent in 2050. So it's going to require a longer-term capital planning process in these buildings to really start to think about how they're going to reduce their carbon emissions. And that's coupled with a state goal with another law that passed this summer of going 100% clean energy by 2040. So that should start to inform what the right solutions are in terms of reaching both the carbon cap goals and but I couldn't agree with more in a lot of ways. The technology, I think in a lot of ways we know some of it. I think there's some great new things that we definitely need to pay attention to, but in order to reach, in order to make a building more efficient, we kind of know some of the main pieces to doing that. And I think there's some really interesting initiatives happening here in New York and elsewhere in Europe on prefabrication of solutions, on packages of measures that can kind of be done as a suite. And I think those, to me, are really interesting and hold promise to being able to do this at scale. And then I think the other thing here in the US really is to scale, is that demand signal needs to be shouted loud and clear in order to get those solutions, the technical solutions that we think may be there but aren't yet at scale or easily accessible or at the right price point. And I think things like the Climate Mobilization Act will start to send those market signals. And I think things like youth demonstrating in the street will start to send those signals. And I anticipate more of both of those kind of things coming.
For me, it's a little bit the same. I quite agree with everything that's been said. For me, as the Secretary of Environment of the government for quite many years now, it's a little bit frustrating seeing that all these years it was so difficult to convince the governments, the other departments of the government, or the government as a whole, the different departments. So we were always the environment department telling them, look what is happening, look what the scientists are saying, we need to do things, we need to change regulation, we need to move forward faster. And it was always quite difficult, for not saying like trying to break a wall that was still there. And now, for the first time in many, many years, I see that society has like waking up and realized that something really dangerous is happening, and if we don't do things very, very quickly, we will not be able to stop this, and that our future is really in danger. And for me, it's really frustrating because I say, okay, what am I been doing all these years? I was not able to translate this, and now a 16-year-old girl has done so much, and much more than the politicians, that the environmental politicians that were in the governments. But for me, it's okay. It's okay. Sometimes with the feminist movement happens something similar, that it's been there for many, many times, and then the Me Too movement sparked something in the society, and then everybody realized it's okay. I am an optimistic right now. I think that things can move quicker and faster, and that now the governments, the environmental departments, and we have to take this opportunity and see, well, now it's the moment. Now you don't have any more excuses, and we have to accelerate. And I agree with you that it's very difficult, that even putting all our efforts, it will take a lot of time. I don't know if 200 years or more, but we have to do it. If we say that it will take 200 years, maybe then we won't do anything, because it says, okay, nothing can be done. So we have to keep doing things and relying on people like the one that have been talking today here with these new initiatives, with these emotional speeches, that I think that everything works together.
Thank you. Anybody got one last quick question? Like to... As gentleman right here.
Hi, Jeff Gracer. I'm on the U.S. board of the Climate Group, and I work with Richard and Dan on these issues. I just wanted to, it's a bit of a softball, but if you could speak a little bit about the role of the broad range of professionals that are engaged in helping to guide this process of changing the way people think so that people actually want to wash the dishes, and how professionals across the spectrum can help change the way people think and bring solutions to this movement.
Sure. Absolutely. I think, and this ties back a little bit to your question as well. You know, I think the notion of doing more with less energy is one that is simple enough, but it is not spoken enough. And I don't think it's spoken in enough circles. So we find ourselves in panels or among good company or in echo chambers with professionals who understand the notion, and we are making the changes within our realm and sphere of influence. But the lesson of doing more with less energy, which I'm borrowing completely from EP 100, that was, you know, we joined EP 100 this year, very proud of it. But I think that's something that the individual citizen needs to carry with them. And so, you know, we run real estate, we're the building operators, we lease space, we develop space. We have thousands and thousands and thousands of people with their own free will to make decisions that have a great impact on the energy performance of our buildings. And so, you know, I think that we need a broad coalition of people outside of just the professional building industry, but in government and in our schools. I mean, Richard's comment on education earlier couldn't be more salient, to echo this message, so that, you know, my generation grew up about knowing recycling, you know, as reduce, reuse, recycle. I don't know if we have that yet with the generation coming up about the value of a kilowatt hour, for example. And so, you know, to the extent that we broaden that message outside of these walls, I think is part of the solution. It's not the whole solution. I agree, we have to think very deeply and radically about energy efficiency, but it needs to be paired with that message and making people accountable as individuals.
Thank you so much for all of your contributions. I think we can agree that the youth movement and policy like the New York Climate Mobilization Act can hopefully drive change and move building energy efficiency forward. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much to our panel and to the energy and passion for the comments from our guests. We have one more session just before lunch is served. You won't get it any earlier. We're delighted to announce our keynote speaker for this session, who is Val Jensen, the Senior Vice President for Strategy and Policies at Excellent Utilities. Look forward to this next piece before we have a break for lunch. Welcome.
Mike, for that introduction. My goal is to be marginally more satisfying than the food that I saw sitting outside. Whether I accomplish that or not, you will be the judge. It's wonderful to have a chance to be here and speak with you for a few moments this morning. Climate Week is one of those things to which I've aspired to attend for a long time. Glad I finally had the opportunity. The irony is not lost on me, however, that in every block surrounding here, there are tens of thousands of cars sitting in the street idling because they can't get anywhere as the diplomats are leaving the UN after having spent the week here. So the challenge for us is huge. I'm here representing Exelon, which is one of America's largest power suppliers. We serve 10 million homes and businesses across the U.S. Our 6 utilities serve some of the largest cities in the country, including Chicago, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Washington, as well as large parts of New Jersey and Delaware. And for most of the last 100 years, our industry has existed to sell more and more power to as many people as we possibly could, generating most of that power using fossil fuels. And as someone on the last panel just mentioned, an exceptional 16-year-old reminded us today that those days are behind us. There's enough evidence. There's no future for fossil fuels in the electric power business, and we need to move on with it. But a clean energy future is going to take investment in new infrastructure and zero carbon generation on a massive scale. We are going to need to reinvent our business, and this reinvention is going to need to be repeated in transportation, real estate, and industry. And at the same time, we know that addressing this problem is one of the single most impactful things we can do for the neighborhoods and the communities that we serve across the country, helping them remain strong, safe, prosperous, and frankly, helping our business remain viable decades from now. This is an existential issue not only for our customers and our communities, but for our company. But we have been at decarbonization for a long time at Exelon. Since 2000, we have divested or sold over 6,000 megawatts of fossil fuel generation, and more than 90% of our generation now comes from zero carbon sources. At the end of 2018, our fleet of nuclear, wind, solar, and hydro plants supplied 12% of all the clean electricity in the country, which is a number that no other utility comes close to matching. But in many respects, that was yesterday, and I think we've all recognized that's not enough. So today at Exelon, we're investing our best people and our money to understand, find, deploy the emerging technologies that are going to speed the transition from carbon. We form partnerships with government agencies, with national labs, with the best universities in the country and venture capital funds to try and speed the deployment of clean energy technology. With Argonne National Labs, we're working on some very exciting large-scale energy storage technology and enhanced smart grid technology that we feel will finally give us the ability to deploy massive amounts of intermittent renewable generation on our grid. We provide seed money to new businesses being incubated within Exelon to explore innovative business models for vehicle electrification, distributed resource management, and social networks for carbon reduction. Our venture arm has taken stakes in battery storage, mass transit, electrification, demand response, and fuel cells. And each of our 6 utilities has worked closely with regulators and communities to boost vehicle electrification. We're installing thousands of private and public charging stations in Maryland in cooperation with the state and our stakeholders to try and significantly ramp up vehicle electrification in that state. We're aggressive supporters of energy efficiency. Fleet-wide, we spend $500 million a year on customer energy efficiency programs, which in 2018 saved close to 10 billion metric tons of carbon, roughly 3 million cars pulled off the road as a result of those programs. And we have one of the largest utility emerging technology programs devoted to finding the next generation of building technology and programs to deploy that technology. Importantly for me, we've launched a major initiative across our 6 utilities to help transform the places we serve into what we call connected communities. These communities are places that harness the power of digital communication, remote sensing, distributed and artificial intelligence, distributed energy resources, and a platform of smart infrastructure to reinforce human connection and serve a hierarchy of community needs. And more personal, less bureaucratic terms perhaps, our strategy is to work with our customers and our stakeholders to re-envision the places that we serve and to reinforce connection, not just electrical and digital connection, but also the economic and social connections that make our communities thrive. We are an infrastructure company that sees investment in STEM, workforce and economic development, environmental stewardship, distributed energy, and community service as being as vital to our business as investment in poles and wires. The future we want to help our communities build is one that will be more decentralized, affordable, inclusive, safe, economically robust, and cleaner, and it will be decarbonized. A great example of what this future will look like can be found on Chicago's south side in a neighborhood called Bronzeville, where ComEd, our Chicago subsidiary, is developing what may be the world's first network of microgrids to serve a very diverse, economically challenged neighborhood. A network that's going to be powered by solar energy sited on Chicago Housing Authority property and going to the benefit of Chicago Housing Authority residents. These microgrids will not only make our grid more modular and resilient, they're going to serve as the hub for innovation based around community energy systems. Building efficiency, to the point of the last panel, is integral to our sense of what these communities can be, but in the spirit of connection, we see building efficiency as something more than improved building shells, better HVAC systems, or building management systems. In Bronzeville, for example, we provide residents with a way to share their home energy savings with community organizations through a digital community square in a very human form of transactive energy. And as participants in a DOE grant, we're exploring the use of blockchain to help commercial buildings in that same neighborhood share efficiency and demand response to help reduce local energy demand. All of which leads me to the thing I'm most excited about today, which is the announcement that the Exelon Foundation and Exelon Corporation are launching a 10-year, $20 million climate change impact fund to invest in startups focused on decarbonization in the territories we serve. Our goal is really threefold: to help identify, discover options that can help mitigate greenhouse gas emissions, to boost the resiliency of our grid, and third, to help cities and businesses in the communities that we serve meet their decarbonization and resilience goals. This fund will prioritize investments in women and minority-owned startups working on innovations that will benefit communities in Illinois, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maryland, Delaware, and the District of Columbia. Our intent is to find those creators, problem solvers, inventors, and innovators who can help us build the vibrant, clean, and just connected communities that we're imagining. The challenges of climate change, as you've heard for the duration of this week so far, and certainly much before that, challenges of mitigation and adaptation are the kind that easily overwhelm us and our institutions. They are existential, as we've been reminded, in the proper sense of that word. But sometimes I think we make these challenges harder by pitting solutions against one another. Solar versus wind, beneficial electrification versus reduced consumption, renewables versus other forms of clean energy, carbon capture versus carbon reduction. And somehow, inexplicably, we still argue about carbon-based generation versus zero-carbon generation. Sometimes I think our comfort with our own tribes overwhelms the plain truth that we need every one of us and the partial solutions that we bring to meet this challenge. So last Friday, as you may have heard, we powered down 3 Mile Island Unit 1, the sister to the more infamous 3 Mile Island Unit 2. Because this unit had been losing money for years in the face of low power prices in markets where we continue to refuse to charge fossil generators for their environmental costs, and where only some zero-emission resources receive subsidies. Having read the news clips surrounding that event, some undoubtedly saw that as a victory for their cause, but that one plant produced more zero-carbon electricity than all the solar, wind, and hydro in Pennsylvania by 2 times. So Friday, we collectively took a big step backwards, and today when we walk out of here, we collectively need to multiply Pennsylvania's solar wind generation by almost 3 times just to stay even. That's just arithmetic, that's not ideology. And in the shadows of 3 Mile Island, 1/3 of the nation's remaining nuclear power plants are facing closure for the same reasons. The annual output of those plants is roughly 70% of all the wind and solar generation in the U.S. today. And we realize there are deeply held views on the future of nuclear energy and the role it can play in decarbonization. But the basic math tells us if we let those plants close, we have to almost double the output from solar and wind in the U.S. just to avoid raising emissions. So we need to at least double renewables output. But instead of using it to make up for the loss of our nuclear output, wouldn't it be much better to be able to count that towards our decarbonization goals? So we're here like you because we believe that even as the challenge gets harder for us in decarbonization, the opportunity to make a difference is greater. When you're part of something like Climate Week, you're reminded that change happens conversation by conversation, person by person, business by business, community by community, and we're committed to being part of this change. So on behalf of Exelon, our board of directors, our 34,000 employees and 10 million customers, thank you again for the opportunity to speak, and best of luck to all of us. Thank you.
Thanks, Val. Thank you. Okay. Earlier this year, we were delighted to welcome the first 2 companies, the Royal Bank of Scotland and Landsec, who had committed to all 3 of our corporate commitment campaigns, RE100, EP100 and EV100. To mark that a moment, we actually went to a different Climate Week, the London Climate Action Week, where we hosted an event with Landsec on just this topic of buildings, on the topic around landlords and tenants. Why did we do that? We did that because the buildings provided the perfect lens to look at how these issues systematically and in the round, and then to look at those 3 areas and to tie that in with our work on LED lighting, which we're delighted to have partnered with Signify over the last decade. I hope this event today and the discussions we've had will in the same way encourage you to think systematically and connected about these topics and how they can support your action around the work on buildings. I would invite you, just as a closing remark before you go to lunch, to connect with colleagues of mine, Jenny Chu, who's been in the audience on EP100, Toby on LED lighting, and other people working on RE100 and EV100. If you're interested in learning more about those opportunities, please find us and talk more. We wish you the best of luck in taking forward your action on this and in addressing the challenge which you were so rightly given about how we will accelerate the pace and scale of action. Thanks for your attention today. Enjoy the lunch and enjoy the rest of the day here at the Climate Week Hub. Thank you.